Hey, and we're live. But carrying on with our conversation from the green room there, Simon, it's just amazing that I get, the sponsors pay me and Mike to have these conversations with people we enjoy talking to. So, like I said, this is round two with Simon. I'm very excited to have this conversation again. Hopefully, the second of many more to come. Um, and while we're waiting for folks to jump on, man, we got a lot to talk about. As I told Simon earlier, uh, today's show is going to be on about handguns. Eventually, we're going to talk rifles, carbines, and then eventually maybe we'll get into precision shooting. But today is going to be handguns specifically. There's so much to talk about in the world of handguns today. I've got a great question to lead it off with. I think
Uh-oh.
a lot of controversy out there. Let's just say that. Simon is a retired law enforcement officer, having started with the NYPD back in 1998. After September 11th, he was offered a position in federal law enforcement where he was fortunate enough to support the global war on terror. Throughout his career, SLG, Mr. Simon, has served as a patrol cop, investigator, firearms instructor, assaulter, and sniper, deploying numerous times to Africa and the Middle East, as well as 4 tours between Afghanistan and Iraq. His experience includes tactical operations, protection, as well as instruction. Responsible for the development of a detachment wide firearms and CQB program while serving as a member of a full time federal tactical team, he has taught and trained with numerous law enforcement and military special operations groups, as well as a who's who of top private schools. SLG's original and continuing interest in the firearms field is effective, performance oriented concealed carry. To that end, he was heavily involved in the development of the original modern appendix inside the waistband holster, as well as many of the current derivatives. An occasional competition shooter, SOG has managed to consistently place highly in regional and national shoots in a variety of different shooting sports, including a first place finish at Steel Nationals and third place at the Bianchi Cup 2 years in a row. Yeah, Steel Nationals is no joke, man. That is a speed competition.
I got pretty lucky that year. It, it was not as grandiose as it sounds.
I don't believe that. Anyway, Will Parker is on coin number 800. Bruce is on up there in Michigan, coin number 481. Speaking of the steel challenge for just a second, what do you think about competitions where you just smoke and hope is the same as it always is, and you're just rushing through that? What are your thoughts on that, where you can set it up at your own range and just run it and run it and run it and run it, whereas a normal match you don't really know what you're going to get?
Well, I guess if you mean normal match, meaning something like IDPA or USPSA, I guess obviously a normal steel challenge match, you're going to have all the same stages.
Hmm.
Bianchi is mostly the same. There's actually like 17 different stages they could choose from, but Bianchi Cup is the same 4 stages. Local and regional matches will sometimes bring in other stages. Um, I guess I would say that they measure different things. And when you have a set course of fire that you can practice a lot, which has never really been my thing, to be honest. I'm not much on setting up courses and practicing them over and over. Um, that's going to build your skill level in a specific area, right? For steel challenge, how fast can you draw and get a good hit? How fast can you transition one shot at a time, target to target? Smaller targets, big targets, further distances, close distances. Very little movement. And like you said, there's no real change. So you're developing things, but you're not developing as many things as a competition that forces you to adapt to what the circumstances give you that day, maybe with more movement, maybe with more shots per target, maybe with more difficult targets, easier targets. Yeah, I mean, just the more you put in there, the harder it's going to be, the better it is for your development. No question about it.
Yeah. So let's get this out right out of the gate. We're talking about handguns. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about. Recently Mike and I had a 2.5 hour conversation with our good friend, Mr. Phil Strader over at SIG, who's the vice president for consumer affairs. You can watch that show on multiple platforms or listen to the audio on the American Warrior Show. And, we discussed the issues with the 320. Now, that was literally 24 hours before the FBI dropped its report. Since then, really, honestly, it's only gotten worse for the 320. There was an airman killed this week. God bless him. From everything I've heard, Simon, took the Safariland holster off using the fork, laid it on the table, and the firearm discharged while in the holster, an uncommanded discharge, and killed the airman. But it brings up the question of striker fired versus double action, and who should be carrying them and how they should be carrying them, and it brings up a whole lot of questions. Where do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I think it's I didn't think it was a very interesting question, to be honest, until recently. Um, Everybody that I have ever worked with that I consider to know something about guns, and in today's world, there's a lot of people shooting guns, interested in guns, that don't honestly know that much about them, and that's fine. We all started somewhere. I'm not throwing stones at people. Even people that shoot competitions and have been doing this for a while, it doesn't really mean they know anything meaningful about it. It just means they've been doing something for a while. So the idea that a striker fired gun is every bit as safe as a double action gun is absolute insanity to me. I'm not saying striker fired guns are mechanically unsafe. I don't believe your normal striker fired gun is going to go off on its own. I don't think that's the case. But guns are tools that humans use, especially use under stress. And how you design a tool to be used under stress matters when it comes to the human interface. We know this about cars and literally, I mean, everything else. I'm not going to go into all that all over again, right? A double action gun simply gives you a greater margin for error when things are stressful. And of course, when they're not stressful also. So I've carried striker fired guns for my whole career, single action guns for my whole career, double action guns for a portion of it. Nobody in my career experience has died or sustained a serious physical injury from a strong side ND. Some people escape completely unscathed. The bullet doesn't touch them. Other people, it goes into them. But none of them have ever died. Multiple people have died from appendix carry. Does that mean appendix carry is unsafe and we shouldn't do it? Well, I do it, but it is less safe than strong side carry. You have to be more expert in how you handle your gun. You have to be more careful and more aware of how you holster and how you manipulate your gun and your holster throughout the day, the equipment you choose to support it, your belt, your clothing, all that kind of stuff. This is not just plug and play at the Walmart for some guy that's getting interested in guns. Striker fired guns are the same way. There's nothing wrong with them. They give you a lower margin for error when handled by actual people. And when you combine a lower margin for error with the gun and a lower margin for error with the holster, you predictably get bad results occasionally. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to have a bad result. We all know, many of us who've been doing this for a long time, that have not had problems. And I certainly expect that will continue for most of us. But just like riding a motorcycle, driving a car, you are taking a risk when you do these things. You can minimize that risk to some extent, or you can disregard the risk and do whatever you want and stick a 320 appendix and decide this is as safe as it gets. I wouldn't do that personally. And I don't want to pick on the 320 because, again, I don't have any facts behind it any more than the rest of us do. Friends at SIG absolutely believe the gun is not going off on its own. Is somebody at SIG lying about this? It's certainly possible, but I don't think it's any of the people we know. And I don't think that it's widely known in the company if that's the case. And I'm not saying that is the case. I'm just saying we have no idea. So be that as it may, I'm not sticking a fully tensioned striker fired gun appendix. To me, there's too little margin for error. And I'm human just like everybody else. So all my years of practice and dedication to this, that doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. We all fumble things. We all make mistakes. That's why they are accidents. We can minimize that. But a double action gun is a good hedge, in my opinion. Is it essential? No, of course not. I've watched you successfully carry a striker fired gun. I've watched many other people successfully carry striker fired guns. It is not a necessity, but it is a nice hedge against the natural tendency of humans to do things either less perfectly than they're capable of, even normally, let alone under stress, or under stress in particular, where maybe we are not as in control of our emotions and our physicality as much as we would like. A double action gun can give you some hedge against that. I didn't think this was controversial at all. I'm not saying we should ban striker fired guns. I'm not saying if you carry a striker fired gun, you're an idiot. I do question your knowledge if you're carrying a fully tensioned striker fired gun appendix carry, because you wouldn't carry a 1911 cocked and unlocked with a pinned grip safety appendix or strong side hip for that matter.
Correct.
Nobody would do that. It doesn't make sense. Not only is there no advantage to it, but it's less safe.
Actually saw this. TC Fuller taught a class last year I went to up in Montana, and there was a husband and wife team who own a security company up there. And I kid you not, never seen it. I'd have kicked them off the range personally, but it wasn't my class. It was TC's. Uh, and they were carrying their 1911s cocked and unlocked.
You're kidding.
Brother, I kid you not, I'd never seen that before. And I didn't know what the drama was going on because I saw TC and Andrew Bronco was his adjunct, and they were having this heated conversation with them, and then and I'm like, what is this? And on the first break, I'm like, what's going on? He's like, yeah, this is tell me what they're doing. I'm like, and you didn't tell them to freaking here's your money back, get the hell off the range. That was his decision, and nothing happened. But my God, man, that I'd never heard of that, seen it before. But it just goes to show you don't know what you don't know. And for these people, they thought that's the way it was supposed to be. And I'm like,
Well, I stand corrected then. I had heard, I don't remember if it's World War I or World War II. I had heard there were certain guys in certain units that might have been carrying cocked and unlocked at the time. Again, we simply didn't know as much about using guns back then as we do now. So certainly not about running a 1911 at high speed. Other than that story, which I can't verify, and I don't even recall the source on it at this point, I've never heard of anybody doing that. So the fact that you've seen this on a range, I stand corrected. There are people out there
in 2024, Simon.
Unbelievable. Well, you know what? If it works for them, we might as well all do it,
No. I got some comments coming in here. Will Parker is on Montana. Bruce is on Michigan. Rudy, my good friend, is on. He is in Chattanooga. We're going to be getting together to do some range time. Derek is on from North Carolina. Will Rhodes out in Missouri. Walt Davis, my good friend up in Ohio. John Shriver. Joseph says 92G for the U.S. Air Force cut for a dot and a rail. Brother, I just happened to have, because I knew we were going to have this conversation this morning, your old pal Rich Brown's 92G. Absolutely love this handgun. I think this is what probably should have been adopted instead of the Beretta M9, because I hated the way the safety could sometimes be on, or it just had a tendency to go where you didn't want it to go. But this, as a decock only, I think it's the French variant, if I'm not mistaken. It's what the French military bought. Fantastic firearm. I've had no issues with it. And for the record, I've carried a Glock exclusive, well, not exclusively. In the Marine Corps, I carried a Beretta M9, but the G17 platform, I think, is fantastic. I've carried it professionally and as a civilian for 33 years. But I absolutely 100% agree with you, Simon. I think this is a bit more advanced. Now, of course, the 320 was made to have a light, crisp trigger. And in order to do that, I think they decided to have a fully tensioned trigger spring. I think that's insanity, but I wasn't the designer of it. The Glock has a little bit of tension, maybe enough to set off a primer, maybe not. I don't know. I haven't seen the data on it. I'm not aware of any other striker fired handgun. And also, people think Glock invented the striker fired handguns. John Moses Browning invented the striker fired handgun more than 100 years ago. So it's been around, but I think Glock, correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, really popularized the idea. I only carry these two guns, the 92G or some Glock variant. But I also, my hands tremble a little bit more when I'm reholstering the G17 appendix than I do the 92G.
I am of a mixed mind on this, because I've certainly carried the Glock for many, many years. I don't think there's anything wrong with a gun reminding you that, hey, this is a deadly weapon and I'm stuffing it in my pants. I should probably pay a little extra attention to it. I certainly wouldn't want to be cavalier about taking a double action gun and thinking, oh, this is a safe gun, and then just slamming it in my holster. So I never objected to carrying the Glock appendix. I don't think it's as safe as what I'm carrying now. I don't think it's as forgiving, I guess, is really my point. But I think there's something to be said for recognizing every time you pull this gun out or have to put it away, it's not a toy. I'm not on a range enjoying myself right now. This is serious. And if I mess up, this could be a really bad day. Um, I don't have a problem with that. But I think it goes back to my original point, which is you need a certain level of expertise in gun handling in order to accomplish that safely under a broad variety of circumstances. Now, again, a civilian CCW carrier, they're not pulling their gun in and out normally. Law enforcement, that's a different story. And if you can't draw and holster your gun safely throughout the day as you run around the world, in and out of cars, doing things, dealing with people, that's a problem. Uh, Minimizing the chances of having an ND while dealing with the public in a police capacity, I think only makes sense for society, for the agencies, for the cops involved. We've all seen videos of cops having NDs while trying to handcuff people and do other things, or having cover officers have NDs doing that kind of thing. If we could avoid that, I think we'd all agree that'd be the way to go. Does anybody who pays taxes in America and is subject to enforcement by local agencies or other agencies, does anybody here think that they would rather that agency carry the most shootable gun on the small percentage that they will need it in a fight, defensive or otherwise? Let's get the best shooting gun we can possibly give these guys. And let's not worry about public safety or the fact that they're actually handling their gun administratively and in non-deadly force situations, but still fights all the time. There's a balance there. And I don't want, look, I'm not anti-cop, right? Somebody's going to accuse me of being anti-law enforcement now. I have pointed guns at a lot of people. Today, that doesn't happen as much as it used to. Laws have changed in different places. Theory on training and employment has changed a little bit. But I don't want a gun that is going to make it harder for me to stay safe with when dealing with the public. I certainly don't want to hand a gun to your average trained law enforcement officer who is not a gun person,
Right.
and give them a gun that is as short and light and shootable as possible. No, I want them to have a gun that is less likely to cause a problem for everyone involved. And if they get in a fight, one of the benefits of the double action gun, right, is once you're in that fight, you've now got a single action trigger for the whole rest of it, which I don't care about personally, but pretty much everybody loves a single action trigger. So anyway, we can beat this to death, no question about it.
Well, a buddy of mine just yesterday, or maybe it was Wednesday, he said, "Hey, can you read this letter I'm putting together?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I read it, and he's a federal officer, but the municipality that he lives in and his children go to school in, those law enforcement officers carry the P320, and he wrote a letter saying, "I think you should remove these from service, and here's why. And I'm a concerned citizen, and I don't think your average law enforcement officer should be handling and carrying these." And I read it, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I agree with you. I don't have an issue with that." One of the things that, and I've mentioned this on the show a million times, and I apologize, but one of the things I like about the double action is I can thumb check the firearm into the holster, and I have seen students with a double action not thumb check, and they're holstering a cocked and basically unlocked, double action into the appendix or in the strong side, and like, you know, that's terrifying. But at least with the striker control device, it gives me the ability to thumb check the firearm into the holster, and to me, it should be an OEM product. But yeah,
So let's talk about the double action for a second then there.
please.
We all carry M4s and
Mhm,
other long guns that have safeties on them and basically single action triggers.
mhm,
Heavy guns, light triggers, easy combination to have it go off. But we expect people, including law enforcement, to be able to manipulate their safety on the M4 and safe it when needed. Yet we now say you can't decock a gun, that this is an insurmountable training issue. To me, there's just no difference. If we can get people to use thumb safeties, as we should, safety selectors
mhm.
on M4s or other guns, again, 1911s, all the guys carrying 2011s today and 1911s, we don't think that they can't learn to use that safety correctly. But with the double action, we say, oh, people are going to forget to do it. Now you're right. I'm not picking on what you said. I've seen people do that. And a guy I know refused to decock his gun because he would not learn the double action trigger. And this was in a law enforcement agency,
Whoa.
kept holstering cocked, was called on it over and over and over again. So he would decock, and then before the next drill, he would thumb cock the hammer in his holster so he'd have a single action shot. Well, he had an ND. He put 4 holes through his pants leg, did not touch meat. I, I don't know how that's possible. He may be the luckiest guy in the world, but that is a terrible student, a terrible attitude,
Yeah.
clearly not corrected effectively on the line. Probably should have been removed at that point before that happened. But if we can work safeties correctly, we can work decockers correctly. I think I just don't see the difference. I will say one thing with the striker control device, and as you know, this was a brainchild of Todd's, and I got to play with the concept with him for many, many years mentally before it ever became a reality. And then, we played with the first prototype and kind of went from there. And I've got them on guns and I do use them. I'm not against them. I'm not saying they're bad in any way that I can prove and I'm not saying people shouldn't use them. My only concern with them is that you are pushing directly onto the back of the striker in the direction the striker wants to go to fire the gun. It's not the same as pressing on the back of a hammer that has been disconnected on a double action gun. I know that the striker control device has been through some pretty good testing informally in the combatives world. I know we haven't had any problems live fire or simunitions or any. I'm not aware of a single problem ever with it. And like I said, I have them on a bunch of guns. I've got different generations of them from the original batch, from the newer batches. I just, in my little pea brain, I don't like the idea of pushing on the striker towards the primer with force. And it depends how you use it, right? If you just rest your thumb there and use it as a tactile indicator that the striker is moving, which is not how I use it, then you're probably none of this matters. But in my case, I push on the hammer because I cannot press the trigger of a double action gun with my thumb on the hammer. Literally cannot. I can 2-finger, 2-hand. I cannot pull the gun, cannot pull the trigger. With the striker control device, I push on it also because I don't want to depend on feeling the very light plate move against my thumb. I want to physically prevent it from moving against my thumb. And for me, I'm not crazy about the idea of driving the striker towards the primer.
And I hear you, but
It's probably irrational.
I think it's somewhat irrational just to push back on
that. It probably is. It probably is. I totally understand.
I'm not aware of a single incident I've owned them for at least 10 years and have them on all my guns, and I won't let my kids or friends carry one without it. But and I do, I would say that I do probably push on it just like I used to do the double action hammers. And I don't know if there's a 1/360th of an inch that's between the back of the striker control device and I just don't know that it's pushing on it in any way. I could be completely wrong.
Oh yeah, no, it is directly engaged on the back of the striker.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're not pulling the trigger, it's not moving.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So my question is there not a 1/1000th of a millimeter gap between that and the other one, so that if I'm pushing on it hard, it's technically not touching. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole on that. I mean, Langdon's producing them now, and you can get some Chinese knockoffs. Be careful with that.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't. I mean, you can buy them on Temu for like $15. Good luck.
Really?
Oh yeah, bro. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not, I'm a huge LTT fan, right? I carry his stuff all the time, used it forever from before he was commercial. I would buy it from him and call it a day. And again, and if I carried a Glock, I would have a striker control device on it. There's no question about it. I admit it's probably irrational, but the idea of pushing the striker forward just bothers me. So if I was carrying a Glock, I would 100% be using that though.
Yeah. Joseph says case law says law enforcement firearms training should be recent, relevant, and realistic, but it never is. You see quarterly check the box and service group training. It's sad. Yeah. And Simon is laughing. For those of you listening to the podcast, you won't see it, but yeah, we all know those of us that have been in law enforcement understand. And the Secret Service, there was a book that came out on them, like some insider's account, and they were just pencil whipping quals because they didn't have enough agents to cover down on all the shifts. And they're like, hey man, just tell me what you shot yesterday. Like, I didn't go to the range yesterday. Yeah, you did. Tell me what your qualification was. And we need to get this put in the system. And I have a problem with that. I have a real problem with that. That is absolutely unacceptable. Full stop. And they should have blown the whistle on it right then. Craig Holland is on from the UK. He says, "Good afternoon from your poorest neighbor, the UK." Derek is on. It says, "The firing pin blocking the Glock will not allow the striker to contact the primer." Shouldn't. Uh, when I was a kid, here's the way I was taught about safety. This is exactly what they taught me over and over again. Safety is a mechanical device that can and will fail, and that's it. That's the answer you need to pass the test. Um, anyway,
and it should be pointed out, and again, as far as striker fired guns go, I like Glocks quite a bit. Glock has had problems with guns going off in the past due to faulty manufacturing processes. And there were problems that occurred to family members of people working at Glock who were in a law enforcement capacity and discovered this problem. So Glock is not immune from any of these issues either. And saying a design is supposed to do, one thing or the other, yes. But when you put the wrong coating on a part and it wears and it flakes off and things happen, Glock has a history of this just like everybody else. So,
well, whether it's Glock, the 320, and 1911,
it's a gun. They have problems.
Thank you, Simon. Also, where I'm going with this is when you start screwing around with internal parts, I got this ghost connector and all this bullshit, and I'm gonna change it to a 3.5.
Yes.
Yeah, good luck with that, man.
Yes.
Because I think you're a motorcycle rider. I was my entire life until I retired. Now I decided not to go on them anymore. It's a personal decision I made after riding one for most of my adult life. But when you start changing the engineer's geometry, you start changing the length of the chain, you start changing the tires. Good luck, man. And that was killing Marines. I've said it 1,000 times, and I've mopped up the blood from another officer who shot himself with a Glock. But he would tell you that he put his finger on the trigger and he slid it into his off-duty holster, and he was instead of holstering like this, he was holstering like this. The finger went in, and he shot himself. And we got him to the hospital, and he had to have bone grafts, and he was never right again. But I mean, firearms are inherently dangerous, man. There's no way around it. Striker fired handguns maybe are more advanced than that. And then you take a striker fired, I think, is to summarize what we talked about here. Striker fired handguns are probably a little bit more inherently unsafe, some more than others, just because of the way that they're designed. And then you put an appendix position, and now, unless you're really, 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 you got millions of reps, you're running a risk, and you may not survive if you make a mistake. Simon, let's get to the second question here. What are the most essential fundamentals of accurate handgun shooting? And specifically, how do you introduce speed into the equation? And beyond competition is, why are we even trying to balance speed and accuracy? I've seen Mike have these conversations with some law enforcement groups we've taught, and because I've heard them say, "Well, that's you competition guys have to worry about speed," and I just put my head in my hands, like, how are we having this conversation?
Yeah. So if I can remember them all, I'll go one at a time here. I may look at this a little differently than maybe other people do sometimes. We can get down into the nitty gritty of the mechanics of shooting, right? But as far as the essential fundamentals, I think that was your first question, right?
Yes.
Okay. I don't view it as a mechanical thing so much as an outlook for the shooter. If you can't feel what you're doing biomechanically as you shoot, you will not progress as well as you could. So what you have to develop is a kinesthetic feel for what you're doing. If you know that you're anticipating because your shots are low on the target like that, but you can't feel yourself doing it, and you can't figure out a way to determine that and then change it, then you're going to keep anticipating and dropping shots. So the issue isn't, to me, and don't get me wrong, the mechanics do play a role in this, and we'll get into that later. But the most important thing is paying attention to what you're doing and recognizing when you're learning, when you're doing something wrong, and fixing it. We don't teach that in most cases. It's not something we talk about a lot. We think, oh, if you just shoot enough, these problems just sort of go away a little bit. And for some people they do. But do we need to spend X amount of years, however many rounds? Couldn't we short circuit that a little bit if we got people to think about, hey, if I'm gripping the gun and I add tension at the last second, let me be on the lookout for adding tension at the last second, and then don't do that the next time. And I think that is really the overlooked fundamental, if you will, in shooting, because it's what slows down your progress in every other way. There's a million instructors out there who will show you, oh, this is how you grip a gun, this is how you stand, put this exact part of your finger on the trigger and whatever. But if we're not teaching people to pay attention to what they're doing and learn from every shot they fire, we're just slowing down their progress. So I am a big believer in that. And along those lines, I believe that people can't slow themselves down enough to learn to do something perfectly. Um, I want to go fast. I want to go fast. I want to be as perfect as I can be. Sometimes at certain levels of ability, that is best accomplished by going fast, paying attention to what you're doing, and fixing it. At most levels of ability, especially when you're first learning, you are better off going very slowly and perfectly so that you actually have technique to fall back on. And then you go from there. Um, I think an analogy that I like a lot on that is whether it's jujitsu or any other martial art, we don't just take a brand new student and dump them into a full contact match. They have no technique to fall back on. They know nothing to do. They're going to resort to whatever their biology is telling them to do. And it's not going to go well in many cases. So instead, let's give them some technique, right? We'll teach them maybe 20 or 30 basic jiu-jitsu techniques for a few months so that they kind of understand some body positioning. They kind of understand how to move and do certain things, at least in a sterile environment. Then when we put them into a role to begin with, preferably with somebody who is advanced enough to be able to manage the role relatively well, now they can start to say, hey, I'm in this position. This is familiar to me. So what is the thing I can do from here? Oh, well, I can do a trap and roll, or I can do whatever, right? We don't expect you to make that stuff up on the fly. And it's the same with shooting. You have to go slow enough. When you grip the gun and you're learning to grip the gun, if you don't grip it perfectly every time, these are not useful repetitions. So let's grip it perfectly. And whatever technique you're going to use, let's do it as slowly as we need to do it in order to do it as perfectly as we can. And as we get more familiar with it, and as we build our muscle memory, now we can start to ramp up the speed. And when we've actually got some sense of it, and none of this takes long. If you're dedicated, we're talking a few weeks in most cases. Once you've got that, now we can start to go faster and do things. But if we can't slow down enough to do it correctly at slow speed, we're not going to do it fast and well.
Okay, love this conversation because um, there was a GM that shoots with my group that we do BJJ together, and he decided to come in and get on the mats with us. So he straps on a white belt and comes in there. We're talking about shooting on one of the breaks, and all of us. It's a primarily law enforcement only jujitsu class, so we don't do a lot of the gamey stuff. We just kind of focus on getting a control position and cuffing and all that crap. So he says, well, when I learned to shoot, not coming from a military and law enforcement background, whoever taught him just focused on speed. Doesn't matter. As long as you're hitting paper speed, and he was crazy fast, but he wasn't winning anything, wasn't placing in the top 40. But then he just dialed in the accuracy. And I'm like, man, that is so anathema to how I learned. I mean, if anything, me and my friends were 99.7% alphas, and we have to train ourselves to go faster and take the Charlie every now and then, and that was a hard thing to do. What are your thoughts on that? Because I had never heard that before, where you just blaze through it and then work on the accuracy.
Yeah. So I think this is a fairly personal decision about how each individual learns and what works best for them. Not only their learning style, but how much time they're going to put on the range, how much ammo they have to burn. I would rather start with accuracy and build speed from there. And when I say build speed from there, uh, I learned it concurrently when I was starting to shoot. So I don't believe that we just work accuracy and we take a bunch of bullseye shooters and try to make them fast. I haven't seen a lot of luck with that, in all truth. Um, Although I don't think it's the problem of the accuracy versus the speed. What I want to do is build my accuracy and build my speed at the same time. And we do that with a couple different drills in different ways. Um, but if you don't have the accuracy, you really have nothing. Speed by itself is completely meaningless. Um, how fast can you hit the earth drawing this gun. Okay. Maybe under some circumstance, that level of speed and inaccuracy might be useful. But normally speaking, I don't think anybody would say that that's useful. So is it okay to be super fast and hit a 18 by 24 piece of steel? Well, what useful target does that represent? It certainly doesn't look like me. And while I'm smaller than average, it doesn't look like most of the population running around. Certainly not when they're running around, it doesn't. So what are we looking for here, right? We have to hit what we're aiming at. I would rather take someone who knows how to hit and work on their speed than somebody who's quick and try to work on their accuracy, because accuracy takes a lot more discipline than speed does. And it's not insurmountable. You don't have to have Herculean levels of discipline in order to be an accurate shooter, certainly not. But it's very easy to not pay attention to what you have to do to get hits and just go fast. Trying to be accurate and hold yourself accountable for every single shot fired is exhausting. Training for accuracy is a tiring endeavor. Lots of people do a little bit of it and then kind of give up and go back to whatever it is they want to do that's more fun, draws or bill drills or whatever. I like having a base of accuracy and building speed. So I hope that answers the question on that. But the reverse of that, if you've got all that speed, of course you can add accuracy. You just have to put in the work to add the accuracy. So it's not wrong to do it that way. And if you're at a relatively high level of ability, and I don't mean like, a master class shooter necessarily, but if you are confident in your gun handling, you're unconsciously competent, you don't have to think about these things, you might find a lot of success pushing your speed, letting things fall apart, and then figuring out how to fix those things, because you can already do a bunch of this stuff without having to think about it. But if you have to think about, how do I grip this? How do I do this? You can't do that stuff at full speed and then figure out the mistakes along the way. Like, you're too low a level to do that. So when people talk about go fast and fix it at speed, I agree 100% with that, if you're at a level where you can take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, again, we talked about last time you were on here a few weeks back, Simon, that whether it's the fast test or some of these other tests out there, not necessarily a drill, but a test, you can measure your level of subconscious competence by the scores that you achieve. If you're like, well, it's what Simon's saying, do I have that level of subconscious competence? Well, Carl Wren's book kind of talks about, I forget the name of it, Strategies for Defensive Shooting or something like that. Fantastic book. And he has those drills, and the fast test is one of them. And he's like, if you're running a fast test at this speed or better, and he has then you have a level of subconscious competence to probably prevail in this situation. But how does training, because we've tiptoed between law enforcement and military and the civilian CCW carrier, how does the training differ between law enforcement compared to civilians? And before you answer, I'll just say, I was watching a video before we got on this morning, and it was the YouTuber was using stock footage of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines shooting the 320. And I was godsmacked at what I saw. I mean, it was awful, awful. Fingers on the trigger when they're reholstering, fingers on the trigger when they were doing reloads. It was all manner of horrible grips that you can't even imagine your worst nightmare. I mean, and they had an instructor there. So that tells me they don't know what the hell they're doing. So just because you had an uncle in the Army and he's going to teach you to shoot a handgun, your experience may vary. So maybe what the question should be, Simon, is what should the training look like? Should it be any different between military law enforcement and your average civilian?
Right before we get to that, can we just touch on one thing you mentioned before, just about the unconscious competence and
Please.
scores on things like fast?
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with the idea of putting a score to a measure of competency, let alone unconscious competency. I probably didn't say that correctly. Obviously, we use scores to measure competency in various ways, but I don't think that a 5-second fast or a 6-second fast or a 7-second fast or whatever you draw the line at, I don't think that means that you have unconscious competence or conscious competence. I have seen people who are not good shooters, but who are phenomenal athletes, throw bullets around at speeds that you wouldn't believe. And sometimes they connect. And so if they pull off a 6-second fast, does that mean they have unconscious competence with the gun? I would say no, not at all. Um,
But here's the thing, I'm going to push back on that because, as you know, you're the holder of the coins at this point. You got to run it twice out of 3 times. So if they can
yes.
pull it off twice, that starts becoming statistically significant, does it not?
So that is the reason we do it twice, right? Is just to
Exactly.
eliminate the chance of it being luck.
Hmm.
And I guess, I guess I'm not saying that a athlete who is shot for a short period of time is going to get a fast coin twice in a row,
Hmm.
after a week or whatever. I'm not trying to say that. Um, but you know internally whether you have unconscious competence at something or not. You know what you're thinking about and what effort of mental attention you have to devote to whatever task you're doing. As a experienced instructor, I can generally watch that and see whether somebody is consciously competent or not. How relaxed are they? Is their face all screwed up doing different things? Can I talk to them while they're doing these things? Can they pay attention to other things that are going on while they're doing it? Like, these are measures of unconscious competence to me, not the score you get on something. Um,
That's hard
so
to quantify, though, brother. I mean,
it
you're
is. It is.
that's qualitative. That's not
Abs-
quantitative.
Absolutely. And I guess that's my point is I don't think you can put a number to it and say, therefore, we have unconscious competence. Um, it's an indicator, but I would say it's no more than an indicator.
Mm.
Uh, I think it would be a mistake for somebody to go out and shoot whatever test they like and say, oh, I got this score, therefore I am this level of whatever. No, you got a score on a test. It just doesn't mean that much. These are tiny measures of shooting ability. Whether it's fast coin, steel nationals, or any other single event, these are small measures of shooting ability. Um, we shouldn't hang too much on any of them, in my opinion, I guess is
Well,
where I'm
let me
going.
ask you this: is what we're even talking about relevant? Building subconscious competence, is that important?
Yeah. So now,
And why is it important,
so
Simon?
to get, yeah, to get back to like the law enforcement civilian thing,
Yeah.
the problem with law enforcement training is really multifaceted. The civilians that shoot aren't being forced to do that. They're shooting because they're interested in it. The average civilian gun owner is a terrible shooter. They know nothing about guns. They know nothing about shooting. They don't care about any of that stuff. They just have a gun and they're fine with that. And maybe they go to the range once or twice a year with family and friends and have fun or whatever. And that's fine. That's your average level of interest. That maybe they view it as a self-defense thing, or maybe it's just for fun. Maybe it's a movie gun they think is cool. But for people that train, they are self-selecting. Nobody's forcing them to do that. They're deciding how much effort they want to put in, how good they want to get. And the civilians that we see at classes are those types of people. The law enforcement we see at classes are those types of people. They would be doing this regardless. But your average law enforcement officer, this is just a job requirement along with a whole bunch of other job requirements. It's a relatively difficult thing to teach, especially in a short period of time, like most training academies have. It's a harder thing to teach when your students are not completely invested in hanging off of every word and every drill you do and putting in the level of attention that we talked about earlier in order to get better. The instructors that are running this are often not super shooting enthusiasts, although certainly some places have people that are. And they are teaching larger numbers of students and in a shorter period of time with a usually limited amount of ammo, and they need them to pass this qual for their job. So the training, and it makes sense, right? The training is geared around the qual because they view it institutionally and on an instructor level and on a student level. They view it as the qual is what matters. I keep my job, I get more guys in the field. So let's structure our training around this qual. Well, that doesn't lead to excellence in any way at all. Civilians don't have a qual they're training for. They have maybe a shooting standard, maybe an aspirational goal of I want to be a GM or I want to fast coin or whatever the case may be. Um, but they are not training around a qual that has relatively low accuracy and low speed requirements. And I say that I've never met a qual that doesn't have low accuracy and low speed requirements. I don't care whose qual it is.
Mhm.
By high level shooting standards, they're all super easy, right? There's no
Mhm.
challenging quals out there if you're a high level shooter. They're all big targets at low speeds, generally speaking. Some are much worse than others in that regard, right? But if you structure your training around this qual, you are going to get lowest common denominator ability, and this goes back to like speed versus accuracy. One of my early mentors, John Holshan, told a story about how he was trying to get faster one time, and so he got a bunch of big steel targets on the range, and he was blazing around shooting these giant steel targets. And then this is when he was still in the army. And when he went into a shoot house for some actual work, he was shooting like relatively giant groups on these targets because he'd been spending all his time blazing on giant targets and not really dialing it down to
Mhm.
vital zone hits. And so he realized, like, hey, I probably need to shoot on more realistic sized targets if I want to have that ability and not have to stop and think, oh, let me do this, right? So if we're shooting qual targets that are giant, like most people are, and a hit anywhere on it is an equal value hit for passing,
Mhm.
of course our results are going to be terrible because those targets don't represent anything that matters. The
Mhm.
times we can argue about, they're usually unrealistic. But even the ones that are fairly realistic, the times don't matter if the target is too big. You think you're better than you are because you're going fast, but your target doesn't represent what you need to shoot at in the real world. Um, so I would say, and I don't mean this literally, because again, civilian training is enthusiast training, and there's a very big difference. But law enforcement training needs to be closer to civilian training from the standpoint of developing actual accuracy standards and speed standards rather and gun handling standards and all that stuff rather than just a qual standard that we're getting you to.
Mhm.
The qual is not helping anybody. Uh, in my opinion, a qual should be a one-shot event, and then we spend the rest of our ammo budget on training.
Mhm.
Um, I have lots of problems with law enforcement firearms training, targets being one of the big ones, training to the qual being another big one. You can't even worry about what the instructors know or what the agency knows if you're already starting behind the curve on a low standard qual with giant targets, and that's what you're working towards. If all your drills are based around the stages of the qual, you're not developing shooting skill. You're just learning to pass a qual. And people like say, "Oh, I was never attacked by a steel target on the range or whatever." I was certainly never attacked by a qual, right? I mean, what does that have to do with anything? So we need to train to a more realistic standard. Maybe civilians don't always do that either, but as enthusiasts, they can sort of afford to wander around a little bit, make some mistakes, correct, come back, learn some stuff because they're putting the work in. Your average professional gun carrier, military or law enforcement, doesn't have that opportunity and isn't going to do that.
I love this conversation, and I don't know that it will resonate well with the civilian community out there. Having been a Marine for 23 years, I got some kettlebells and I got excited. I was going to do, work on Turkish get-ups, and I'd read the literature and this is great. And I'm going to work on all these kettlebell swings and get into that. This is like early 2000. And I mean, I packed on a lot of muscle, but it really didn't translate to a better PFT score.
Right.
And as an officer, I get rated relative to my peers, and and that's one of the differentiating quantitative variables that's going to mean whether I get promoted or not. So it became like, sell the kettlebells, they're not helping me. I have to train to the qual, which is 3 mile
Yep.
run,
Yep.
pull-ups, and crunches. And then they added the combat fitness test, and you got to throw a grenade. So we're out there throwing dummy grenades. I mean, it's just like, I don't know how you get around that unless you go, it's one shot qual, guys. We're going to train with the rest of the thing, uh, because it's maddening to me that we waste so much time. You're right. All the training budget goes to training for the qualification, and it's like, what the. I almost use the F word. What the hell are we doing? I don't know how you get around that unless you do something like you said.
Well, and in defense of that method, which I can't actually defend, but in defense of that method, at least at many of the places that I've worked, you have very large numbers of people on the line
Mhm.
at a basic academy or at an in-service qual. If you've got 50 to 200 people on the line, you cannot teach them the way you teach a civilian class.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. It's not possible. So you have to develop methods to address, the military is probably the best example and the best at this because they have so many years. They are taking, historically speaking, and throughout history, they are taking young men in large numbers and trying to get them to a standard in a bunch of areas. They don't have the time. I mean, basic training was like 6 weeks for a long time. Maybe it was shorter even at one point. I
It
don't
was
know.
13 in the Marine
Now-
Corps, but
yeah.
that's, yeah.
Now it's certainly longer. But when you've got 6 weeks or 13 weeks, these are not long periods of time to train people. And we're not talking about shooting. We're talking about a dozen skills or more. So you come up with methods, and so like running, right? Running has been much maligned in fitness circles because strength is what matters for fighting in many ways and for health in general, and I agree with all that. But running also matters, and one of the reasons running works really well in the military is that it costs nothing to put a large formation of guys on the road and run. And so
Right.
you can build mental toughness that way, you can build unit cohesion, you can get some endurance and physical fitness benefits from it. It is a method for developing things that matter to those people. Is it the best way? Maybe not.
Mhm.
But if you've got 200 guys, what are you supposed to do? You're not going to have your typical place, not going to have 200 squat racks. Like
Exactly.
that's just not a thing, right? We don't have the ammo to allow everybody on that line to shoot at a B class level of shooting, even, right? It's just not going to happen. To get to B class takes a lot of practice in shooting for most people.
Mhm.
In the 6 to 13 weeks to 19 or 20 weeks of most law enforcement agency academies, they just aren't going to get the time, the ammo, the cost. It's just too much. And then when they get out, again, because of cost and time and everything, they're only going to shoot it once or twice or 3 or 4 times a year. I'm not aware of any agency shooting more than 4 times a year for their line guys. And 4 is a lot better than 3 or 2, but it's still not very much. Um, Compare that to driving. We send guys to tactical driving schools for, let's just say it, a week.
Mhm.
They've been driving their whole lives, mostly before that. Not always, right? But in many cases, they've been driving for at least a number of years before that. They go to the school, they learn some good techniques. Guys like to drive, they're pretty aggressive. Then they go out on the street and they drive all day, every day in many
Mhm.
cases. And they get to chase people and they get to do things with the car that builds their skill level over time because they're
Mhm.
doing it every day, all the time, under stress, for real. That is not anything to do with firearms training. Like
Mhm.
that's just not a thing, right? So you compare like the driving ability of cops to the shooting ability, it's completely different.
Sure.
Cops drive incredibly well compared to civilians. Shooting, not so much.
Yeah.
So I certainly have a lot of ideas for changing that, but there are some really legitimate big hurdles to overcome when it comes to budgets, numbers of instruction, numbers of students, facilities, and interest level is a big one, right? You can only get somebody so far if they're not interested.
Yeah. So many great comments coming in this morning. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have an opportunity to get to most of these, but just if you're watching the video, these are some great thought-provoking points that are being raised here. Um, yeah, I was thinking about the PFT as it relates to like the CFT, and I was a guy who I always ran a first class PFT, but it was in the lower end. And there's a first and second and third, and I never ran anything but a first, but it wasn't a 300 PFT, I can tell you that much. Um, Maybe around 240. But then the combat fitness test comes around, and instead of running a 3 mile run in your little ranger panties and go and nice, Asics tennis shoes, you're running in boots and utes, and you're only running a mile, mile and a half, whatever it was. And then you got to carry another Marine of your equal weight on your back and do all this stuff. Man, suddenly I'm a stud. I'm getting a perfect score as a 40-something-year-old man because it's measuring something a little different. And I loved when they introduced that because it balances it out now. And you can see the guy who's a little skinny guy who can run really fast. You put weight on his back and he's got to carry another Marine. Suddenly his score drops, or he's got to run in a set of boots and suddenly he's not running as fast as those little tennis shoes he's got. So I think it's maybe the qual is something like that, where there's a little bit of balance there. You know what I mean? You have two quals a year, and one measures one thing, one measures another, and you aggregate the data on the two. I mean, it'd be better than what we have right now, maybe.
Yeah, so various people over the years have suggested ideas like that, and some places do it where they'll randomly pull a qual out for the quarter or something, and they've got maybe 5 or 10 different quals they use. Um, I think the problem with that, though, unlike the PT example, the reason you did better at it is because it more closely measured things that you practice and are naturally, I
Mhm,
don't mean naturally like laying around the couch naturally, but like you're naturally good at that. You enjoy that stuff, you work that stuff. And I would argue those things are a little more practical than running in tennis shoes at longer distances and all that kind of stuff. So
mhm,
making it a little more practical as well as gearing it towards the things you're doing lets you do better at it.
mhm,
With the qual, there really isn't that kind of dichotomy, I think, because the guys we're talking about, they're not out shooting some other form where they would do better at this other thing and they're just worse. Like if you can shoot, you can shoot, right? There's no, you, you may be, if you're a USPSA guy, you're going to do really badly at a bullseye match,
mhm.
but you're not going to miss the target if you're a
Right.
competent shooter.
Mhm,
Um, of course, if you're a bullseye shooter and you go to USPSA match, you might miss the target entirely, or it might take you 40 minutes to get through a stage. I don't know. But the point is, like, if you can shoot, you can shoot, and it sort of applies to everything. And if you need to dial in what you're doing for a particular issue, then you just do that. But with the PT, to your point, I'm in the same boat. I was a CrossFitter for a long time,
mhm,
and when I had to go to the FBI Academy, I'm like, I'm in the best shape of my life, but I better go run the PT test a couple times and just see what's going on with that. Because
mhm,
the test has a certain amount of rest in between the events. The events are designed to make you progressively more tired. So the next event is harder. So I went and did the PT test just to check it out. And I didn't train the PT test, but I absolutely incorporated running it every once in a while just to make sure that I was still able to do what I needed to do based on the other things I was training. With shooting, I mean, your average officer, just to talk about that side, right? The average officer is not shooting something else, and and he can't say, oh, well, what I'm doing is real world, and this qual is ridiculous, so I don't do that well on it. He just doesn't shoot.
mhm.
Um, so I do think there's a slightly bigger problem than switching it around like that, but I'm not against switching it around at all. It's just that all the typical quals that people are going to draw from are still all pretty low level skills that I don't think equate to hitting bad guys on the street and not hitting innocent people running around behind them.
Yeah. No, solid. Just on the CrossFit, we had a new commanding officer come in. I'll say his name was Dave. I won't go any further than that. And he decides that for my 36 months out here on recruiting duty as a commanding officer, I am going to focus on CrossFit, and we're going to, when a new recruit gets to Paris Island, we do give them an initial strength test. So that's the pull-ups, crunches, and a mile and a half run. And then by the time they leave, they have to do a full PFT. So it's like, I'm gonna crush the PFT standards, because the standard was 95% of your recruits had to pass the initial strength test when they got to Paris Island. Well, we're gonna crush that, and we're gonna do it with CrossFit. We're not gonna touch the PFT. We're not gonna train to the PFT of the CF, the IST. It's gonna be CrossFit. His scores went boom, 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 boom. Now I have
Yeah.
no doubt that the young men and women were stronger. They were better CrossFitters, but it did not translate, as you mentioned, to what they would be measured against. And if, to his credit, and I told him when he left, I'm like, you drove your command off a cliff. You didn't look at the data after 90 days and see you had a nice 3-shot group that it was trending down. You just drove it right off the cliff, and you should have been relieved of command. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, no, it's
Uh,
it's interesting how that works.
yeah.
No one training methodology works for everybody, and none of it is the be all end all.
Yeah.
And some of these tests, you do need to look at the specific requirements. Um, but I guess I would say, well, it doesn't even matter. If you're a high level shooter, right, there are no quals that are challenging under any
Hmm.
circumstance. If you're simply capable, then yes, some are going to be easier than others, some are going to be harder than others, and depending how you train, you may meet that next standard or you may not. So I think that is a very realistic way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, they were tearing up shoulders, doing the rings and all kinds of stuff that had no correlation to the
Right.
pull-ups.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we could go all day on that. That's a whole nother show, maybe. So I'm going to talk about fitness. I love Joseph's comment here. He says, I know of just one agency around me who has a random monthly qual, and they pull you off the street. In between quals, they give you dry fire goals, also free ammo for training. Man, I love that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But that is not the norm.
Hell no, I've never heard of that. I'm in love with that, Joseph. You need to email me, buddy, rich@americanwarrior.com. Let me know where they're doing that. I'd love to see some of the data on the back end. That's incredible. One of the things that you're known for now that you've stepped out of your federal role as an FBI agent, SWAT guy, you're teaching pistol-training.com, and you've got your calendar up, and I've taken your class, on-demand performance. I love it. And a lot of the stuff that I do now with my folks that I train weekly is focused around that, because I think as a CCW guys and gals, that's what we need to be focusing on demand training. But how do you build that? And how did you come up with a methodology to build it?
Yeah, so there's no easy answer on this, unfortunately. There is an easy way to mess it up, but there's not necessarily an easy way to get it. And what I mean is, if you go to the range, and I don't care how good a shooter you are, you could be a great shooter, but if you have a warm-up routine that you go through where you know build up to whatever it is you're going to do with your gun, then your chances of being able to execute at that level right off the bat when you need to are incredibly low. And I've seen this time after time in competitions. The first stage that people get to, very rarely is it their best stage. Depending on the competition, of course, you might even go cold in between. It can take so long, but oftentimes the first stage is the worst. There's jitters, there's a psychological aspect to it. There's a physical aspect to it. And so I believe, and again, I don't have data to point to. I have experience and anecdote from 30 years doing this with people. Um, I believe that if you warm up to your shooting ability when you go train, you are just hurting yourself when it comes to trying to do things on demand. Um, we don't get to warm up for self-defense fights, for police fights. The only people that get to warm up might be SWAT guys before they go have to hit a house or something. And I'd draw a few times. I'd do some up drills with my M4 before I ever went out on a SWAT hit. It just doesn't make sense to go do something like that. Again, early in the morning, you're not functioning as well as you could be in most cases. Better to get warmed up and go do that. No question about it. But for most of us in most scenarios, there's no opportunity to warm up. You simply have to do what you're able to do, and that's that. So I don't want to warm up in my training. Now, I'm not talking about, I'm 50 now. I'm not talking about like not stretching out a forearm or something. I don't want to hurt something unnecessarily. Um, but I don't do that first thing on the range usually. What I do first thing on the range is go as fast and as hard as I can go with the most accuracy I think that matters to me, and I work that. And as you know, that's the cold heat drill that I like to do. And if you start with accuracy, slow fire accuracy, which is what a lot of people view as warming up, you are not building your ability to go fast and hard when you need to. If you start with speed with an appropriate level of accuracy, now we're building something that looks like what matters to us off of the range, right? And again, people can argue about this all they want. I'm not really that interested in arguing about it with people, but I use a 6-inch circle. Even big guys, the vital zone on a human is not that big. And when you talk about like deer hunting, elk hunting, moose hunting, people talk about like 8-inch vital zones, 12-inch vital zones, 18-inch vital zones. Yeah, the animal's much bigger, but I don't count all those lungs as really mattering. Lung shots don't put people down unless they want to go down. So at least not right away. So I don't really count all of this as a vital zone. To me, the vital zone is maybe a couple fist size, right? It's the heart, the spine, the major arteries coming off of it, and not much else. So a 6-inch circle to me is a more realistic target. I hold that for deer and elk and moose and whatever else as well. I don't believe I'm just going to throw a shot because the animal is so big I can afford to hit it somewhere else. Like that doesn't work out very well, either hunting or on the street. So a 6-inch circle, as fast as I can at car length distance. And so that translates right to 5 yards basically. I don't like averages. You could certainly train this at different distances, but my point in doing it at a set target size and distance and time is because I want to measure progress over time. And if we change variables, we can't measure that progress the same way. So I think 5 yards is reasonable. I think 6 inches is reasonable. If you're lucky and maybe the vital zone is actually bigger than that, okay, great. You're not hurting anything. But also, do I need to shoot so fast that I am not accountable for any of my rounds or my thoughts at that point? And I say thoughts because I'm not making a conscious decision on every single trigger for this. That the courts have never required that standard. It is not realistic to think in a fight that you're going to do that in any way at all. We don't have to make a separate lethal force decision every split second, but we also can't outrun our headlights so badly that we're putting rounds into people that are laying on the ground not moving. Like that's not effective either. That's not acceptable. But so I don't want to shoot so fast that I'm just on autopilot trying to bill drill something. Having a smaller target helps me slow my shots down a little bit, requires me to slow down a little bit to guarantee those hits. I think that builds some mental discipline to actually focus on getting the hits rather than making the gun go bang as loud and as fast as I can. That is how we build on-demand performance from a on every day on the range standpoint. Start with speed, start with a realistic target that represents something that matters to you. 18 by 24 steel, to your point with Steel Challenge before, Smoke and Hope's a lot of fun. And you definitely, if you want to learn to push your speed, Smoke and Hope is a fantastic vehicle for helping you push your speed. But because you're great at Smoke and Hope, doesn't mean that translates to anything else, because 18 by 24 targets don't exist in the real world unless we're shooting at tanks or something, I guess. I don't know. So a 6-inch target, 5 yards, car distance, from concealment, hands up in a placating or fending position as needed. And then what can I do from there? And I do it over and over and over again every time I go to the range, because now I have data from a year's worth of training, 10 years worth of training. Under these conditions, this is what I'm doing. I've gotten a little bit better. Under cold conditions, maybe it's a little worse. Under small gun conditions, maybe it's a little bit worse. Hot weather conditions, maybe it's a little bit better. This gun I do better than that gun. This holster I do better than that holster. Whatever the case may be, you have something to measure those things. I know I'm getting a little long-winded on this. I apologize. So that's how I view structuring range training for developing on-demand performance. There's the mental component and there's the physical component. And this one aspect of having to do it right there from the beginning on demand helps to build that. Now you only have one cold run, right? So after that, we're just training. But that one cold run is super important. And most people waste it when they go to the range. They shoot a group or they do something else, or they do something they can't measure over time. I want to use that first cold drill test shooting event to get the most out of it that I possibly can. And I don't think there's a better way to get more out of it. At least I've not come up with one. I've not seen one yet. So that's the range component. Off the range component, we want to handle our gun as frequently as possible. This is not a secret, right? If you shoot once a month and you handle your gun once a month, you're going to have once a month level skill. Nobody develops skill on a once a month basis doing anything really. If you shoot your gun once a month on the range and do cold heat and do all these things, and you train and have a good training program once a month, but you dry fire 5 days a week, even for just a few minutes a day, and you work these same skills of how fast can I get a good sight picture, how fast can I draw my gun, pushing my limits, seeing what I need to see. Now we're keeping that skill level high because of the frequency that we've done this thing. And that's a level of commitment that many people are not going to put into it. But if you're willing to handle the gun, practice dry fire with it frequently, the more the better, right? I mean, 7 days a week is better than 5, but I think 5 is very realistic. If I don't have training time in a given day, the least I do is that when I put on my stuff in the morning, I do a couple of dry draws just to make sure that everything's working, nothing's hanging up my gun, my clothing didn't change, my holster position didn't shift or whatever, and it warms me up to a good fast draw. That's a bare minimum amount of touching the gun and staying relevant on it or recent on it, right? But the more recent you can be, the better off you are. And this has been known in fields forever, right? This is nothing new,
Yeah.
but many people just don't do it. And oh, I'm busy. I've got a family. I've got 18 hours of work or whatever the case may be. I understand all that. Like life gets in the way of doing this. Not all of us spend all of our time on the range, me included. But if I can do 20 seconds of draws before I walk out the door just to make sure that my actual carry setup is working, that will go a really long way to keeping your recency and your relevancy for your on-demand performance.
No, I hope everybody heard that. Recency is huge, and I think the data has borne that out over multiple domains. Very, very important to understand that you can have I got a black belt 5 years ago and haven't been on the mats since then, or a blue belt who is on the mats every day. He's probably going to, he's maybe end up mopping the floor with that black belt because it just hasn't trained. So the recency is incredibly important. Mike is on. Mike, good morning, brother. He says it's like the cold bore shot for sniper. The first one counts the most. Absolutely.
100%. And it's funny. So in the sniping world, this has been understood. It may not be replicated perfectly all the time, although modern sniper training is pretty impressive compared to how it used to be. But they've always understood like that's what matters. And for some reason, we ignore that in every other area of firearms instruction and training.
Yeah, tell us about your cold heat. You mentioned it a couple times, son.
So cold heat, it's a drill I came up with a few years ago, based on a drill that Todd and I had been doing for many, many years at the NRA range, originally starting in 2002, I guess, maybe even 2001. I think it was 2002, though. I say I came up with it. Lots of people do variations on this. It's not it's not like there's some secret sauce to it, but the difference is it has to be cold. Only your first one is cold, and that's the one that counts. And I've sort of stabilized on 6-inch circles, as we talked about for vital zones, and 5 yards as being car distance. If you can hit a 6-inch circle at 5 yards from the draw once in under 2 seconds cold, you have a reasonable amount of skill. And I know that doesn't, it doesn't impress anybody who shoots a lot. I've had people tell me, oh, I could probably get six hits, right? Like sort of bill drill. Well, I've never had anybody get 6 hits. A top 5 USPSA GM friend of mine got 5 hits, which is very impressive. That is much harder to do than I think people realize. It's not a bill drill. People are thinking about their warmed up times and not their cold times. But again, there's some great shooters out there. I'm sure somebody can do it. I'm not throwing out as a challenge. So if you can hit it once in under 2 seconds, you have a very respectable level of skill. Certainly enough, I think, as a civilian CCW person or a police officer who just wants to be competent with their gun. I think that's very, very good. If you can hit it twice in under 2 seconds, and these are arbitrary, I kind of view that as like a firearms instructor level of ability or a SWAT level of ability. You've obviously spent more time on the range, more practice, and you've got a higher level of skill. If you can hit that 6-inch circle 3 times in under 2 seconds, cold, from concealment, that is what I would consider to be like a tier 1 level, if you will. It's kind of a dumb title maybe, but the point being, to consistently be at that level, you have to be shooting on a more or less full-time basis. You don't have to be a high-level competition guy, but you have to be shooting. You've got to be going to good schools. You've got to have really good instruction. You've got to be training regularly. It's not easy to get 3 hits on demand on cold heat. But I leave it at 3 because if you can get 4 or 5, like my buddy, that is absolutely a high-level competition ability and is not relevant to what we're talking about as people that want to defend ourselves or as police officers carrying a gun in public. If you're at that level, great. I'm not throwing stones at it at all. but I don't want people to think that that is a level they should strive for if their goal is competency with a gun for self-defense. Because you probably, once you get to 2 or 3 shots in 2 seconds, you probably need to worry more about physical fitness and hand-to-hand fighting and driving and first aid and all these other things, rather than continuing to eke out diminishing returns on just how many shots I can put into that, right?
Yeah.
So it's very impressive to watch, and I would love to be able to. I can't do 5 shots normally. I've eked it out occasionally. It's very rare. I'm lucky to get 3 most of the time, but I don't get 3 all the time.
Mhm.
And uh, especially demoing in front of a class, you have a little more stress, which is very useful, and I really appreciate that opportunity. As an instructor, again, talking about like law enforcement training, most law enforcement trainers don't shoot in front of their students. To miss that opportunity to develop yourself and to shoot under that little bit of stress, let alone to show your students the way it should look, I think it's criminal not to shoot in front of people. And in civilian classes, we all know that. Have you ever been to a class where the instructor doesn't shoot everything more or less? But you go to an academy and they're all carrying red guns and they almost never shoot in front of a student. And when they do, sometimes they mess it up. So then they make excuses and they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. It doesn't look good, it doesn't go well. So I relish the opportunity to shoot in front of people on the range and see what I can do, because what I do on my range at home is nice, but it's not really nearly as meaningful as even the little bit of extra stress of having to do it in front of somebody. And all of that helps build your on-demand performance. So that's cold heat. It's nothing revolutionary, but if we don't capitalize on the first cold shots of the day, in my opinion, we've almost wasted our training.
Yeah. You certainly miss a huge opportunity to take advantage of that. Yeah, I love it, man. I absolutely do. Simon, what if any innovations or new techniques or technology in the handgun training space or in the handgun industry, what have you, are currently influencing you, if any?
That's an interesting question. If if people are training today and they are not looking at new things that are coming out, and I don't mean like, oh, I got a new red dot or a new version of this pistol. We shoot better today than we did when I started shooting in the 90s. We know more about it. We can teach it faster. We can get to a higher level. Things progress. Um, I think that one of the most interesting things going on today is actually the neuro training system.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of us like to make fun of using the term neuro because a lot of people want to put science or seem to put science into training. And I don't think that's always the way to go. I don't think that's understood very well. And so we like to make fun of it.
Can you
Um,
explain for those that don't
yeah.
habla Dusty's neuro?
Yes. Yeah. So Dustin Solomon wrote some books on the neurology of shooting. And I will tell you, and I've told him, we talk, relatively regularly. I don't necessarily agree with all of that stuff. I'm not necessarily qualified to even understand some of it. But what he has developed is absolutely useful. He's taken a shot timer and slaved it to a set of lasers, red and green lasers, and now on the range, your shot timer is based on those lasers starting and stopping, and then measuring your shots off of that. So we can do, again, and this is something that's been known, again, my entire life.
Mhm.
A visual start is really what matters for fighting. We don't stand around waiting for a beep and then go, right? Um, but it's very hard to accomplish that. We use turning targets in law enforcement,
Mhm.
and that was originally for accountability more than training a visual start, because we wanted the target to disappear so they couldn't put extra shots on it over time. But if it's used correctly to appear and disappear, then we can use it as a visual start. And again, at the NRA range, Todd and I did a ton of work on this forever. And this is where cold heat came from originally. Um, we would give a 2-second exposure for the target, and we wanted to see how many times we could hit it. And we were using paper plates at the time, so a little bit bigger, and we were doing it at 7 yards. Um, and we were just going for blazing speed. But the neuro gives you the ability to have a visual start. You see a laser, and you can get certain shapes. appear on your target, that's your cue to start. When the laser goes away, that's your cue to stop. And then the shot timer measures all the shots from when you started shooting. It tells you what the delay was from the laser to your first shot. It tells you what the lag was from the laser going away to your last shot. So Dusty uses it in many ways for teaching people to de-escalate and stop shooting when they need to. And I think that's very valuable. Um, but there's also lots of other ways to use it. And I've got a couple of these units that he sent me to play with. And I've been using them to test things like reaction time to a visual stimulus versus an audible stimulus, using it with low level shooters and some higher level shooters. And I don't like technology that much, to be totally honest. I would rather just go to the range and use my paper targets and steel targets and call it a day. But this neuro really does give you the ability to advance some of the things you're doing. You can set up very complex scenarios with it that are sort of beyond my scope and interest in some ways, but on a individual shooter basis, the laser start and stop combined with the timer just gives you the ability to measure a lot of different things and to make things more challenging. And so, for instance, like when we start with the audible, it's not even just that it's audible. I'll be honest, I don't find any difference that's measurable between a visual start and an audible start. I know other people disagree with
Between
that.
new shooters and
Uh,
everybody.
no, I'm talking just about reaction time to a
Oh,
visual
okay.
stimulus versus reaction time to an audible stimulus. I don't see any difference. Where I do see a big difference is if you're waiting for an audible start and you're boring a hole in the center of the target you're going to shoot at, you know what your task is. You're ready to go. That thing goes and you're on it. With the laser, though, where is the laser going to appear? If you set it to the center of the target, it works just like the beep does, and you just drill it down or burn it down. But if you put the laser a few inches away and you have to look at the laser and then look back at the target, or you put it further away and you have to move your eyes further to see what's happening and then back to the target. Again, there's probably a point of diminishing returns because we don't look at some guy, a block over to determine what the guy in front of me is going to do here. But when you have to shift your focus, you slow down 100%, right? Not that you slow down 100%, but everybody does slow down when they have to shift their focus. So we can shift your focus progressively, build your ability to still react quickly. We can test it on a hard level. We can test it on a slightly easier level. We can do all sorts of things with that. And vision is really, I think, where the frontier is on shooting today. The mechanics, there's only so many ways you can grip a gun as long as they're designed the way they are and our hands are designed the way they are. You can play with little things, but gripping the gun is gripping the gun. Standing is standing. Your vision is so important to, and again, so getting back to your Steel Challenge question originally, one of the things that Steel Challenge does better than many others, even though it is mostly a stand and deliver type of competition, is that if you want to be good at it, you have to move your eyes really quickly. And you have to not only move them really quickly, but they have to stop very precisely on the thing you want to hit. And that is a skill that most people don't have naturally. Very few sports require that type of really fast movement and instant stopping. A lot of sports require tracking, and other sports can be very, very challenging. I'm not diminishing anything else, but this is a somewhat unique requirement of shooting. When you're driving at high speeds, you don't shift your eyes and stop them. You're constantly looking for where the road is opening. You're not looking for, oh, this is where I want to drive to, and then I'm going to move over here. Like you're constantly moving. In shooting, you have to pause for a split second on the exact spot you want to hit and then move really fast to the next one. And so the neuro in the tactical training world kind of lets you do that in ways that we can't do with just Steel Challenge or just multiple target shooting arrays, which is really all that is. So the laser gives you the ability to work visual issues and how that relates to your reaction time, your accuracy, your ability to focus on what's happening. It's a very, very interesting technology that I view as just sort of like next level shot timer, but it gives you so much more than just that.
Yeah, I've got one as well, and that's where I met Simon at Dusty's course, maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember.
Yeah.
It was a rainy day. I know that. Yeah, and but before that, I had went. He had me and some other industry folks out to play around with them, the prototypes and stuff, and I love the idea. Absolutely love the idea, and it's everything you said, and then some, because I can program the laser to be a flashing green or a solid red or a flashing red, and each one I could then, as the instructor, say, okay, flashing green is. He didn't draw a handgun. He drew, like, I'll tell you, the first guy I ever arrested, brand new cop, my FTO sitting in the cruiser, and this guy had warrants on him, and he, for whatever reason, he calls in 911, says, I want to, I'm ready to be arrested. I'm sitting at the corner of 123 XYZ. Um, he was a Bravo Mike, black male, and we lived in a town where Bravo Mikes were relatively, they weren't plentiful. And so there he was, sitting right there, but he had his back to me. So as I approach, and I got my hand on my firearm, and I'm like, "Hey, pal, are you, Keith?" And he jumped up, exploded to his feet, spun around 180, and then drew this black thing. And I'm getting my gun out. This is the first guy I've ever arrested, and he presents a black Bible. He had found Jesus in a halfway house and was ready to turn himself in, and he wanted to show me the chapter and verse that had changed his life. And it was textbook for holy shit. And I'm about to shoot this kid to, okay, let's put some handcuffs on and go to jail. But I mean, that level of speed decision making, I think the neuro can do that, because it wasn't audible. I saw a visual signal, and the visual signal up to the last second was telling me this is a shooting solution. So I think the neuro is great. I have a hard time with, and I have friends in the industry who are just like, that's gimmick, it's crap. I'm like, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah.
Everything is visual.
Yeah.
And to your point about like smoke and hope, I remember having dinner with Rob Latham, and he was talking about one of the ways he trains his eyes. Like, he's like, as I'm driving down the road, my eyes snap, if you will, between road sign to road sign as fast as I can move my eyes. And that's something I've always struggled with. Sometimes the gun ends up there before my eyes do, and then I'm chasing down the sights. So all these things are incredibly important. I think the neuro is an excellent tool. A very good friend of mine right now has reached an agreement with Dusty to produce a smaller, instead of the big one, the robust one that he has, very expensive, but it's had Bluetooth and wireless, and you can connect them to these wristbands, and it does a whole lot of things. And if you're running a large range, that are going to make it really good for you. But he's like, a product that's under $200 for the average consumer. And they have reached an agreement, and he's got a prototype that literally just came off the 3D printer this week. And I'll see if I can't get one in your hands there, Simon.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating, because I appreciate Dusty sending this out to me, but as you pointed out, it's probably a little expensive for most people to use normally. So
Yeah,
if there was something on the market that was, competitive with shot timer prices that gave you anything like this, man, that would be fantastic.
I agree. I love Dusty, and I've had lots of conversations with him, both here at my house and other places. Like, you got to do this, man. It, if I was running a range in the Marine Corps again, or as a law enforcement firearms trainer, it would be fantastic. But I need something to work with my 2 or 3 guys that I train every week.
But
So let me ask you this, man. What about the mental game? How important is mental conditioning and stress management for shooting proficiency, whether we're talking about in the profession that you came from, or now as a civilian like the rest of us?
So we talked about it a little bit, as far as the idea of training for on-demand performance.
Yep,
Um, you could probably say that without correct mental management, none of the physical stuff matters.
agreed.
Um, and everybody knows that's literally true, right? If you end up in like a puddle of sweat on the floor, unable to do anything, it doesn't matter that you were amazing, on the court the day before.
Right.
Developing mental toughness, which I think is the more easily recognized side of it, and maybe the foundation in some ways. Developing mental toughness is key. And this sort of gets a little bit back to some of the stoicism that we touched on briefly before. I have seen all sorts, and look, I shouldn't say I, right? All of us, anyone who's watched sports has watched amazing athletes melt down, lose their minds over things and act like childish idiots.
Right.
These are guys that are being paid millions and millions of dollars to perform this thing, and they just explode. Um, that is a form of mental toughness and mental management that matters that they don't have. And at some point, that person may get into a situation in their career, in their sport, where they needed that and they weren't able to get through something because of it. So, again, getting back to the military and law enforcement stuff, one of the things the military has always done really well, that was sort of a founding principle, I think, of the concept of putting people through a boot camp, was mental toughness. We need to get people to realize that they can handle more than they think they can handle, and that they're not going to quit when things get tough. If you don't get that out of a basic academy type program, then the whole thing is just a failure. Um, and a lot of agencies don't do a very good job of that. And certainly not the way the military does, I think. So civilians don't have that same access the same way, but these are things you can develop on your own, right? You can go wake up at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. and work out before you go to work. You may not want to do that, but if you enforce the discipline of, hey, I know I need to do this. I'm just picking working out as a random example, but obviously working out is one of the best examples, because the act of lifting weights, or the act even of running, of pushing through boundaries where you think you're going to fail or collapse and you keep going, that is a long proven way of developing mental toughness. Lots of people don't like working out. I don't like working out, to be totally honest. I've always done it. I hope I always will do it, but it is a absolute discipline to do it sometimes. And not only is the lifting heavy weights part building mental toughness, but the actually got to get up and go work out right now builds mental toughness. So everyday life gives you plenty of opportunities. If you don't want to have a hard conversation with somebody, you can take the easy route and just gloss over it. That's not helping you, right? It builds your mental toughness to go address an issue with a friend and have that conversation. So I'm not trying to be a life coach or anything stupid like that, but there's lots of opportunities that we overlook because they're not tactical, or, oh, I'm not in that agency or unit or whatever. But there's lots of ways to build these things. On the range, one of the ways is to do it cold, to work on our cold ability, to do it in front of people. If you've got a training partner that you can have friendly bets with, but you actually lose something, like you got to pick up all the brass or something, like these are things that can help motivate you to do better and can help build these skills and mental toughness as well. Um, I'm not an expert on mental toughness. I will say that having been through one really challenging selection course, and then a few others that frankly weren't all that challenging, but were still a lot of fun and probably more difficult than people not in those fields are doing. Um, I think that experience, as combined with everything else that I just talked about, has really helped me perform and deal with things when I need to. And I've shot with guys who are world-class shooters, but whose mental management didn't work for them because the weather turned bad or something else happened and they felt slighted or whatever the case may be, and then they bombed a stage. And unfortunately, high level skill doesn't always come with high level mental abilities, but the best at anything have both, of course. And if we can build that through our daily practices, if we can build it through something like a selection, if you have it, if you're not in law enforcement in the military and there's some challenging thing at work that you can do that you feel like, oh, that's going to make me uncomfortable, I don't really want to go do that, or maybe I'll fail at it, like that's a place to go do that. Like, you have to test yourself in some way or another. If you do it through physical fitness, if you do it at work, if you do it in some other way, that's great. We have to build that, I would say.
No, I agree, because it goes back to, like, we're talking about on-demand performance. Well, mentally is on-demand performance. I mean, you can tell me your resume all day long. I don't care. We'll find out, like you said, when it's cold and raining, who wants to put their shit away. And that's the thing. Like, I do not, and I've said this before, maybe when you and I were talking, I do not like competition shooting. It's not that I don't like shooting. I love shooting. I hate listening to people in my squad bitch with the RSO about a penalty or a perf hit or pasting targets, or I just loathe that. I hate being out there. My club matches, there's 140 people and it takes 8 hours for me to shoot literally 40 seconds worth, and I got to be out there all day. And again, people melting down after a stage. I'm like, you're a grown man, dude. Freaking relax. You're not winning a new Toyota Tacoma here today. You're not even winning a piece of paper. You're winning nothing but bragging rights, relax. So, and to your point about Stoic philosophy, those may have heard it before. I think it was Thucydides that said, one man is much the same as another, and he is the best that is trained in the most severe school. And I've talked about it. Paris Island, I was there for 6 years, and the whole thing is inoculation to interpersonal violence, so that when you get in a scrap and you get punched in the face, it's not going to be the first time you were punched in the face. When you pull a gun and point a rifle in somebody's direction, it's not going to be the first time, or jam a bayonet into a dummy. You've done it before, at least once or twice. And you have to do it. And if you're a civilian, you've never had those opportunities, you're going to have to seek them out. Whether it's running a Spartan race, and if you can do the Spartan 5K, then you need to go up and do the Beast. Do something that pushes you and makes you uncomfortable. I cannot say that enough. And then, so the brain has already been there. When it gets tough, it's like, oh yeah, this is nothing. I've been in suck fest before. I know what this is like. I want to get this out here. This is incredibly important. Will Parker says, anyone interested in Simon's Montana class in 2026, email me, will@fmgw.net. This is the only way to be notified after announcing the date. It will be sold out in 48 to 72 hours. Barring my death, I will be there.
Oh, awesome.
Come hell or high water. Any chance to get to train with you and go to Montana, two of my favorite things, I'm in.
Well, I know it's the Montana more than me, but I appreciate you coming out.
Absolutely. Can you share any memorable experiences or lessons that you learned from your years of carrying a gun professionally that really translate to every time you step on the range? Like, I want to make sure I inoculate, to use that term again, my students during this 2-day class I've got with them. This is a lesson they have to leave here with. Is there anything, Simon, like that?
I think so. I don't know if it's quite that easy for me, but one of the things that I'm really keen on in my classes is absolute trigger finger discipline.
Mm.
I'm very keen on all the safety rules, and we talk about that stuff and we enforce it and everything. And I don't put up with people that are going to be waving guns around. But in the real world, especially in law enforcement and military tactics, there are times when you will point your gun at a teammate and there's nothing you can do about it. And if civilians don't understand that, it's because they're not doing that job. There are times when it is impossible for that not to happen. So we want to avoid that as much as we can. We certainly need to hold those guys to the same standards that we're talking about. But if your finger's off the trigger, that person is not going to get shot. And so ultimately, it all does come down to trigger finger discipline and press outs, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of. One of the things that I really stress when we're teaching is, if I'm in a ready position, I'm ready. I have not decided to shoot. So my finger needs to be high and off the trigger in what I would call the register position. When I've decided to shoot, the gun moves to the target, because that's the slowest, longest thing that has to accomplish now, right? When the gun moves to the target, that movement is what tells my trigger finger to go to the trigger and start doing its job. I don't ever want to be hanging out here with my finger on the trigger and then moving the gun. And I don't want to finish shooting and then keep my finger on the trigger and pull the gun back. When I'm done shooting, whatever assessment I'm doing, I don't need to shoot anymore. My finger's coming off the trigger, high in the register position, and then the gun comes back. And I really believe that order is incredibly important for building real world safety capability. And this gets back to like appendix holstering and striker fired guns and all that kind of stuff. If you don't understand where your finger should be at all times and why it should not just, oh, this is safe or it's not. No, what is it doing there? What's its role? Why is it safe there? And why is it not safe somewhere else? What are the problems that can occur from that? If you don't understand all that stuff, then we really can't have a conversation about holstering safely and doing all those other things.
Mhm.
And the reason this is so important to me, aside from the fact that I have pointed a gun at teammates in the past. And again, this is not like it's not some secret squirrel thing, right? If you're doing CQB at night in a dark house, when you get to your point of domination and you sweep across your sector, you don't know where your teammate is standing. And so you're going to run them over with your light or your nods, see them, and then come back. So maybe you won't, but oftentimes people do sweep each other doing that. If your finger's off the trigger and if your safety's on you know, on an M4 or whatever, then this is not really an issue. It is less safe than on a square sterile range, but it is not unsafe at that point. If my safety's off and my trigger finger doesn't know where to go, then it is absolutely unsafe. And who knows what's going to be outcome there, right? Like it's predictable, but we don't want that to happen. I had a SWAT operation one time where we were going after guys that were talking about killing judges and law enforcement officers and stuff. And they had been training. They had rifles and body armor and all the modern kit and everything. And this was way out. I'm not going to say where because I don't need to make anybody think it's them or something like that. But this was way out, and there was snow on the ground. And so I was the number one man going to the door. And I've told the story in a couple classes. People like to tell war stories. I get it. I like hearing interesting war stories. I'm not a good storyteller. I don't think my stories are nearly as interesting as other people's, and they mostly only matter to me. But this one is one that I'm proud of, to be honest, and I think is a good illustration of all this. So I was the number one guy going to the door, and I fell in a hole in the snow. Couldn't see any of it, and I literally fell down to like my armpits. And I was, I don't know, 10 maybe 10 yards, not even from the door at that point, and there's a giant window overlooking the yard. And then I see movement behind the window, and it looks like somebody went like this. And I'm thinking like picking up a rifle because that's what the intel says and everything else, right? And I'm like, I'm sitting in literally like a hole in the snow, unable to do anything about it. I'm, you know, getting out, but I didn't shoot because I don't have a target. Like there's a person moving there. I couldn't see. It wasn't clear the way the sun was hitting it. So all I could see was shape and a little bit of movement. But so I thought, all right, well, I'm probably going to get shot now, but what am I going to do about it? Like, there's nothing I can do. All this training, all this time, and this is what, you know, I get dumped into. So I got out of the hole. We get to the door. We go in. It was a woman holding a baby, and she had picked up the baby like this, and that was the movement that I saw that I thought was, you know, maybe that was a rifle movement or something. Again, couldn't see the baby, couldn't see that it was a woman. This was just a shape of a person moving. If you act out of fear, you probably would have shot that woman. That would have been the worst outcome possible for that day, as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to get shot on an operation. I don't want my teammates to get shot, but I would rather get shot than shoot an innocent person who is not trying to hurt one of us, let alone a woman carrying a baby, right? And there's a lot of issues with that. So um, if you don't have confidence in your abilities, if your fingers don't know where they should be at all times and why you're doing what you're doing, you will make bad decisions. And it doesn't have to be that it's some woman with a baby, but you may deal with a guy who's accosting you on the street, and you may ramp it up in your head and think this is a much greater assault than it is, and he's just shaking you down for a little money. I don't mean robbing you, but an aggressive panhandler where there's no force justified at this point, but you may ramp that up in your mind and then overreact to what's happening. We have to avoid that, whether it's law enforcement, which we see examples of, unfortunately, or civilians, which we also see examples of. We have to be able to control our emotions and have to be able to make good decisions about what's going on. And so blazing fast speed on the range is wonderful. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with reality, in my opinion, because the decision making that goes into employing that blazing fast speed is the much harder to train aspect that mostly comes from experience. And that's the important part that separates experts and professionals from people that are just sort of dabbling in it. And I'm not talking civilian or law enforcement. There are expert civilians, there are non-expert law enforcement. It's a whole spectrum, right? But some people put in the time, effort, and experience, and others do not. And if you are so focused on what my split time is, how fast I'm breaking this shot, whatever the case may be, again, there's a time and a place for that. But the overarching issue is, what is the context that we're using these things
Right.
in?
Hmm.
And my trigger finger discipline and my knowledge that I can't just shoot at things that scare me. I have to shoot at things that are actually verifiable threats to me, or that a reasonable person would believe is a threat in that circumstance. I certainly wouldn't want to make that argument in that instance with that woman behind the glass. So that's not a very exciting story. Um, but I think it really has helped define how I view training on the range from a safety standpoint. I want real world. I need training needs to mimic the real world as much as possible, and that's why I mentioned sweeping teammates under certain circumstances. Um, we don't shy away from doing dangerous things, but we still have to mitigate the danger when we can. And a square range in a fundamental type class is not the place to be pushing the danger envelope. If you can't keep your finger where it needs to be at the appropriate time under those incredibly low stress circumstances, very defined set of parameters, how are you going to excel in a dark alley with limited information and split second decisions? And I think the two are related. I'm not saying that one develops the other, but I'm pretty sure that if you can't do the one, you probably can't do the other.
No, well said. I completely agree with you. Um, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Last question, Simon. I kept you almost 2 hours. I'm so sorry.
Not at
Uh,
all. It's
but
great talking to you as usual.
I enjoy it. I absolutely enjoy it. What is your EDC these days? Now that you could pick whatever you want, you don't have Big Daddy FBI telling you what you got to, what you can and cannot carry. What does it look like these days?
We're talking just like guns or like everything? Like,
Whatever you want, brother. Anything and everything.
okay. Which, by the way, that just reminded me. Somebody commented before about how sorry they were that I was living in my car or something. Um, and we live out in the country, and internet is really bad. So I'm actually sitting in a parking lot in town just so I don't, ruin the connection here. But so normal every day right now, I've got a HK-P30 on me. This one has a 509T on top and a Streamlight on the bottom. It's an LTT gun, which is certainly my preference for any gun that he works on. Um, I'm using a JM holster right now, although I am waiting for a new holster from some friends of mine who do amazing holster work. So I'm kind of excited to see that hopefully soon. Um, Single spare magazine behind the hip for me. Uh, Tenacore mag pouch, Tenacore belt. Um, I've got a clinch pick on, which I've been carrying now for almost 20 years. Big fan of the clinch pick. Um, I've got a Swiss Army knife with me because I just think that's really useful. I've got a pen because I think adults should carry pens with them, even in today's modern age with the cell phone. I like having a pen. And then the one thing that maybe is not, which I know you'll know about, but I carry a military triangular bandage folded in a rectangle to the size of my rear pocket, and it is set up to use as a tourniquet. Obviously, I could use it for anything else that you would use a normal cravat for, no big deal. But it is specifically set up as a tourniquet, and I'll just mention it briefly. Um, I don't always have a source of these. I try to give them out at my classes because I'm such a big believer in them. But a good friend of mine, his name is Fabrice Zarnecki, for anyone who knows him. He's a genius level emergency medicine, trauma medicine specialist who happens to work for the government now, but he didn't when we met 28 years ago or something like that. He's the guy who taught me how to use tourniquets initially, taught me why they were important, taught me that the rest of the medical community doesn't understand any of this at this point, but like TCCC was starting to do it, and that, and so this was kind of where this was coming from. And he recommended in my uniform pocket carrying a triangular bandage as a tourniquet. And so as a cop, I carried it in my breast pocket all the time in my uniform. This was, again, there were no cats or anything else that you could buy. There were no ready-made tourniquets. Nobody ever thought about carrying something like that normally at the time. So this has been with me in one version or another for 28 years now, and I've never had to use it, thankfully. But I have it with me. It's practical. It's flat. It's not uncomfortable. It's multi-purpose. If you did ever really need it for something, I'm not gonna strap a cat to my ankle in one of those little ankle carriers or whatever. I have no problem if people do that. I'm not gonna do it. So this lets me carry a tourniquet. I could stuff a wound with it. If and again, like, I've never used it, but you come across a car accident. You never know. I'm riding a motorcycle. You never know what you're going to come across where it's just useful to have. And so, where people think about the gun a lot, and some people think about these, pretty trick medical kits with their ankle carriers or small the back carriers or this and that. This is just as basic as it gets, but it gives you really a ton of capability, I think.
No, they're fantastic. And go to Mountain Man Medical. We have a cool branded trauma kit that my MARSOC buddy Justin, Simon knows him, who's now a practicing paramedic. Actually, he just swore in. He's a law enforcement officer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we put that together with them. That's incredibly important. You got to have your medical. If you train to punch holes in people, you need to know how to patch them up. That's as simple as that. And I think everybody in the community knows it now because it wasn't always so. I remember in the early days of my Marine Corps career, tourniquets didn't exist. We had a
Yeah.
triangle bandage, and you trained to that with a stick or with a magazine to use as a windlass, crank it down, whatever you had to do. Now we have access to some amazing things, but the versatility of that triangular bandage is still hard to beat. Um, Simon, thank you so much for being on, my dear friend. It's been an amazing conversation.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate talking to you like this, and makes me think about things, which I also appreciate. And yeah, it's been very enjoyable, and I look forward to shooting with you again soon.
Same here, brother. And where can people find you, Simon?
So my main website is pistol-training.com. That's my blog. So I try to write an article a couple times a week that might bore you to tears or entertain you, possibly. Um, I do have a YouTube channel that I use to support the blog. I'm not financially, and just support content on the blog where I'll do some videos of stuff. And I am trying to do more of that because people are visual learners, and I understand that. But really, yeah, pistol-training.com.
And that Simon's catalog of training for the rest of the year is up. Do you have your 2026 calendar up yet?
It's just starting, actually. I've got a few classes scheduled for 2026, but I do have plenty of openings in case anybody's interested. I don't do a lot of classes each year, so I say plenty of openings. There is plenty of room, but I'm not going to do a ton of classes. So if anybody is interested, please hit me up at that website, or my email is slg@pistol-training.com. Yeah, I hope to see some of you guys on the range.
And Simon's not just a handgun guy. Stay tuned for round 3. We're going to get into carbines and long guns, and then maybe have an episode on precision rifle shooting because it's not just pistol-training.com. You have to change the name because it's a full spectrum firearms training.
Wow. So if we got a second here, I'm
Yeah,
really
of
glad
course.
that we talked about pistols today. And I think I left something out when we started talking about it, because there's just so much stuff to talk about, right? Like we've only scratched the surface on anything.
Mhm.
But pistols are really where it's at for me, because these are the things you can carry with you all the time. And I don't want to live in a country where I have to carry a rifle, to be honest. I have done that. And I'm happy to have done it professionally. I don't want to live in a country with a rifle strapped to me. That is not an ideal situation as far as I'm concerned. But so the pistol is absolutely where it's at. I love carbines. I do carbine training as well. The precision rifle stuff, to be honest, I've been out of for a little while now, so I'm not
Mm.
sure that I would want to delve too deeply into that. But I love shooting rifles. I love bolt guns. I love hunting. I certainly, enjoy all that stuff. So yeah, guns are guns are guns.
Yeah. Speaking of what carbines, did you see that shooting in Alaska that happened 24 hours ago ish?
No, I did not.
Yeah, I was a bouncer for almost 5 years, and evidently one of the bouncers had his kit in his car. So as the this escalation is rolling, he goes outside the club, throws on his body armor. He's a former military guy that didn't say what branch of service. And as it's escalating, he's grabbing his carbine, and that's when the guy starts shooting, and he shoots another bouncer like 7 times. And he's running basically this untrained scumbag in Anchorage, Alaska, is basically running a bill drill as he's backpedaling. But he backpedals right into the carbine, and he gets shot 6 or 7 times with a 5.56 round at like 1.5 meters.
Wow.
And it put him down quick, and it saved God knows how many lives. But it's a crazy video. It just dropped yesterday. It's worth a look, and that's something else we didn't talk about today. When you and I grew up in the '90s in this profession, we didn't have access to all the stuff you have today, as far as like
No.
watching the videos and learning the lessons. And there was a lot of speculation as to what works. This is pre-UFC when you and I were doing martial arts back then. We didn't know what worked. Well, guys, you young men and women today that are getting into this, you have a incredible opportunity. You can put yourself into these situations, visualize it, do some mental training. You can set up stages that mimic some of the real world stuff. There's no reason. The books, I mean, back then you went on Paladin Press, and got Bill Wilson's book or John Shaw's book or something like that.
Yep.
There just wasn't much out there. Maybe you got Jerry Barnhart's VHS collection, right? To learn stuff. But now, man, there is so much good stuff out there. But it's almost like there's too much, because now people don't know who's who. It's like, and they're maybe training with somebody they shouldn't be. What do you think?
I agree. I don't want to be in the position necessarily of saying like this is good training, this is bad training, but there is relatively little good training. Even everything you said is true. There's a ton more availability today. We know more, we see more, we can do it faster, we can do it better. We have the technology, but there has always been a relatively small amount of really good trainers and training, and there are more today, probably, maybe, but there are lots of people teaching and spouting off that absolutely are not qualified and don't know what they're doing. And I don't think it's hard to determine who's who, to be honest, but you have to be careful with that stuff. I've been to classes in the past where I just couldn't believe some of the stuff that was going on, and that's been very rare for me, thankfully. But I think if you train enough, you'll run into that.
Yeah, I talked about this. I think somebody, one of the way I get the predominant way I get my guests is publicists will reach out like, hey, you want to have so and so on your show. So
Oh, really?
this one particular person, I did not know them. I think I heard the name. Maybe they were former NSW. I don't know. And I won't say the person's name, but I went on Instagram and I was watching some of their stuff, and I went back to the publicist. I was like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing for your client. There's no way I could have this gentleman on the class, on my show, because what he's doing not only is unsafe, it's tactically unsound. I could almost live if it was one or the other, like tactically great, but every now and then he muzzles somebody, and we can have a conversation about it. But when it's unsafe and it's tactically insane, there's no way I can have this guy on here, or it's just going to be I'm going to beat him up and and make it's just not going to be good. Got anybody else, send them my way. But as far as this gentleman, and they shot back like, what are you referencing? I'm like, here's his Instagram. Tell him to look at this from whatever date he released it. There's like a series of 8 videos. It was just terrible.
Along those lines, and I don't want to use his name because I'm not looking to get into all that, but I just watched a video of a guy that I don't know. He's a competition shooter. I think probably most people know him, but he filmed the video talking about some guns, and at one point he picks up a 50 cal and points it at an aircraft that's going overhead. And I think I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, because that is actually a federal crime. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that it was a cut and place thing where he wasn't actually pointing a gun at the plane. It's just sort of trying to make it look that way for the video to be funny or whatever. But so I'm not saying he pointed the gun at the plane. I'm saying he pretended to or made it look that way or whatever. That has no place in the firearms industry today. the training industry, the competition world, people like that are the ones that give us black eyes. And I don't understand how many people think that kind of stuff, those antics are okay. And so again, it doesn't matter to me that he probably didn't actually point the gun at it. It's the image of doing that. I guess I have a problem with that.
I agree 100%. I absolutely have a problem with that. And, it has no place uh, on this show. I'm not going to talk to somebody like that. You're not part of my community. I don't know what part of community you are, but it's not the one I live in. Simon Golob, thank you so much. Pistol-training.com. Get your ass into a school seat with Simon soon. Hopefully I'll see you in Montana next year and you can train with me and Simon and Will Parker and Don Bothwell and all the other folks that's going to be there. It's going to be a good time. Simon, thank you. I look forward to round 2.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
All right, guys and gals out there in Warrior Nation, remember the fight is coming. Be ready.